Hello friends, today I want to talk about the utility of the question, does truth matter? So, we tend to assume that there is an objective reality out there. There's something with the universe going on when we're not looking at it. But we're confronted with the fact that getting information about that objective reality is really hard. At the most, we get to experience sort of out to the extent of our nervous system. Everything beyond that is a mystery, So when photons enter our eyeball and cause proteins at the back of the retina to flip their three-dimensional configuration into an alternate configuration, which sets off an electrochemical cascade that results in a bunch of firings of neurons going into our visual system, we don't experience any of that. What we experience is this constructed image that arises from millions of those signals being processed by the brain. So the raw constituents of reality, they're not there for us. We're in a hard spot. And there are roughly two ways that people have dealt with this sort of conundrum. There's the idea of sort of high quality, fine detailed information about that objective reality being the truth, capital T, an ideal to which we aspire. Right? So yes, it's hard, but we double down. We find ways to improve our consistency, to work together to form a consensus that sort of asymptotically approaches this ideal of capital T truth. That's one approach. Another approach is just to say, that's way too hard, and most of the time, that sort of capital T truth, that fine-grained knowledge of what's really going on out there in the universe, isn't important. In huge swaths of our day-to-day life, what matters is not what is happening in the universe, but what people believe about the universe. So, if we want to have the biggest impact on our lives and the lives of other members of our society, what we should focus on is making sure people believe the right things, or at the very least things that serve our agenda. And that's another response, where instead of worrying about discovering the truth, we're worried about constructing a narrative. And that narrative, once it's out there in the wild, it sort of loops around in people's minds. It colors the way that they perceive things in the future. And if you're good at constructing effective narratives, then you can make sure that people's beliefs about what's going on in the world corresponds to the sorts of things that get them to behave in a way that benefits you, right? And if you are optimizing for your own short-term self-interested benefit, that's really a much better way to go. Why waste all this time trying to find out details about a universe that is just going to go on doing whatever it does regardless, when we could be focusing on making sure everybody's working with the narrative that serves our interests? That's another response. And I should hasten to add that I lean very strongly towards the capital T truth is the ideal that we should aspire to camp, so I probably am not doing a very good job being fair to the other camp. But that's a division that's existed in human societies for a long time, at least, all the way back to the roots in Western societies of our philosophical tradition, where you have Socrates, the truth matters, and the teachers of rhetoric in his day, who is constantly squabbling, who just say what people believe matters. So it's important to be just aware of this distinction between the truth and the narrative, because very often people come to turmoil and difficulty when dealing with their fellow human beings when they don't understand what the other person is doing in a given discussion and whether or not the truth is important to them. Because whichever way you go on this, discourse is at the center of the process, right? So if you are engaged in a discourse that is focused on discovering the truth and employing all the techniques that bring us asymptotically towards the truth, then you're doing something like science or philosophy, all the sorts of things that fall under the heading of sort of critical thinking. And if you're engaged in constructing a narrative then you're engaged in all of the techniques of persuasion, which we see in our propaganda, our public relations, our marketing, etc. But both of them involve discourse, discussion, the exchange of ideas through language. And so if the parties to a discourse have just sort of unconsciously internalized one view or the other, and then they come together and engage according to whatever they've internalized and are blind to the distinction and don't understand the motivations of the other party, then things get really, really confusing, fraught, distressing. So just being able to answer the question, does the truth, capital T sense, matter here? If so, to which parties? And is that really worthwhile? And I would like to just address that question. Is it really worthwhile? In sort of a very big... I can see where my camera is now. A very big social sense. Bring it down to sort of more of an interpersonal sense. And then finally look at it on sort of a day-to-day individual basis. Because sometimes, even when you're not talking to other people, you should be asking the question, does the truth matter? So we're going to get into that. So on this big social level, you're out there being an informed citizen, engaging constructively with your fellow human beings, trying to shape the dialogue that determines the course of our society. Does the truth matter? Well, it depends on who you're talking to. And the reason this is important is because if you know what's motivating the other parties of a given discussion, then you know who it is important to speak to. If you're trying to discover the truth, then what's important is your engagement with the other parties in the discussion. So that's your audience, right? You need to tailor your presentation to engage with what they're saying, and to either criticize in a manner that draws out flaws or in a manner that draws out further information that elucidates their position. If you're trying to construct a narrative, then what matters is how you engage with the audience. Not people who are involved in the discussion, but onlookers. Because it doesn't actually matter what the person you were talking to believes at the end of the day. It matters what everybody looking in on the discussion believes. And then, instead of engaging constructively, critically with what the other person is saying, the goal is to score points. And point scoring in a discursive context is troublesome if you don't know what it is and what's going on. Because there's this profound asymmetry in the universe that it is much, much easier to make a bullshit claim than it is to deconstruct a claim and show why it is bullshit. So if you want to score points, then it's in your best interest to say a bunch of things, let your conversational partner get bogged down in trying to break down why those things are bullshit, and then you just do a victory lap as they're stumbling with, yes, you showed those 2 things were bullshit, but what about the other 15 things I said? Clearly you don't have any arguments for them, otherwise you would have argued those points, right? I've scored 15 points and you've scored 0. I win. That really is how debate is done, broadly. You see it on your Facebook wall, where somebody makes a claim, it goes back and forth, people are really going at it, and then it becomes everybody just talks past each other, trying to get the most stuff in, because they're not really interested in persuading the other party. They're interested in persuading everybody who's reading along that they scored the most points and therefore they're correct. And, if you're the sort of person who values the truth, this is incredibly distressing, because you come in there and you've got all of these great arguments and you show why this person is full of crap, and no amount of demonstrating that their positions are clearly false seems to have any effect on persuading them to give up arguing those positions. Well, that's because they're playing a different game. they're not interested in discovering what's true. They're interested in constructing a narrative that resonates with the most people. And in participating with them in what folks who fall into that, capital T is valuable camp would call in good faith, you're actually giving them an opportunity to throw a bunch of stuff out there and get some points on the board and do a little victory lap. It's great. It encourages them, right? Because at the end of the day, as long as you don't take down 100% of their arguments and you spend all of your time, all of your participation in the discussion is in the negative, just trying to take down the BS that they've thrown out, then they've won. They can only lose if you get every single claim of theirs knocked out and make a bunch of claims that they can't address. That's the only way that they can lose on the point scoring front. At which point, if one should ever manage to exhaust such a person of bullshit arguments, they'll just leave and pretend it never happened. Go score points somewhere else. So if you don't ask the question, hey, does the truth matter here to these people? You run into a situation where you can cause yourself a lot of aggravation. You can waste a lot of time. And if you don't ask that question, you really run the risk of using up all of your resources, your access to the discussion, trying to discover a truth, and the narrative's already gotten away from you. Right? Somebody else has already set the narrative. They've constructed something that works, and once the narrative is running in somebody's mind, it affects their ability to perceive sort of the capital T truth in the future, right? Because every single piece of information about the world that's coming in gets compared to the narrative that's already there, and if it goes against the narrative, then it's likely to be discounted. So if you are spending your time trying to discursively discover the truth while somebody else is constructing the narrative, you are way, way behind, and you're going to lose the persuasion game. So it's very important to answer that question for yourself before you participate in anything. Does the truth matter to the people that I'm going to be discussing with? If it doesn't, then I better make sure that I'm tailoring my presentation not to convince them, but to convince the audience, because what we're doing here is we're constructing a narrative. And I need to get a narrative out there that's going to allow people to be receptive to the truth in the future. So that's the big social picture. So we had a little technical malfunction there, but we're back. So I wanted to talk about sort of the interpersonal level. Does the truth matter? How can that question be helpful there? I don't want to do that through just talking about a story. Okay, so I play video games. That's a way that I interact with my social group. And most of the people that I play video games with, I've been playing video games with for a really long time. So I was having a discussion with a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about an incident that happened 12 years ago, maybe, where we pissed each other off playing a video game. And my recollection was that she was being a right jerk. And her recollection was that I was being a right jerk. And it's far enough in the past that there's no way to really ascertain who was being a jerk in that situation. We remembered a completely different sequence of events, but from the sort of things around the event that we remembered in common, it's clear we're remembering the same thing. To the greatest extent that that's possible. And now, I've got a narrative about that that's been repeating in my head for the last 12 years. And she's got a narrative about it that's been repeating in her head for 12 years. And we both were really clear about what we were talking about. And it was really a tricky position for me, because when I'm listening to her narrative about what happened, I'm thinking to myself, that actually does sound a lot like something me from the past would have gotten up to. And my narrative is alarmingly self-serving. So if I was an independent party and knew what I know about myself and know what I know about my friend, I'd probably actually go with her take on the matter. Difficult situation to be in, of course, because my narrative's been running in my head and is now making it very difficult for me to take on information about a different perception of reality. All right, so we're sitting there having a discussion about this, and it actually really was a sort of a capital T Truth Matters discussion where we were trying to dig at, like, figure out, okay, who else was there? Who could we ask? Well, what portions of each person's narrative are consistent with the way that the other party behaved at that time, et cetera, et cetera. None of that went my way, by the way. None of that went my way. But it's still really hard on sort of a gut level when you've had one narrative running for a certain amount of time to accept a different narrative, right? Especially one that doesn't make you look very good. And what I got to about that over time was, this is an example where the question, does the truth matter, really can help cut through this situation. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether or not my friend has recollected these events accurately in a capital T truth sort of sense, because it's completely inaccessible now. It's so remote, there's no chance at all that we could definitively ascertain what happened, right? But the narratives that we walked away with are important because we both participated in the construction of those narratives. So if she walked away with a narrative about me being an asshole, then it actually doesn't matter the exact details of how I behaved or what I intended, because here's my friend, somebody who I've had a relationship with now, for, 15 years or something like that, having a negative experience of me. And that's important regardless of how that narrative got constructed. There's something that I can learn from that, either about how I present myself or how I behave, or at the very least how past me behaved, or just how I interact with people who I care about and want to have a positive experience of me. If I get fixated on this sort of capital T truth, I can waste a lot of time trying to chase down details about what happened out there in reality all those years ago. But there's no value to that, to me, in the present day. What there is value to is reflecting on, how did I contribute to this narrative that I really would rather reject about myself being formed? And to what extent are the contributing factors still present in me today and how I interact with people and how I present myself to people? And what lessons can I draw from that, and how can I learn and improve going forward? So if I ask that question, hey, does the truth matter here? The answer is definitely no. Capital T truth, it's unavailable, and even if it was available, it really doesn't matter because there's nothing for me to learn from it. But there is something for me to learn from the narratives that were constructed and how they persist to this day and how they shaped sort of perceptions of myself and of my relationship to the people around me in the present and going forward. So answering that question can save me a lot of wasted effort trying to chase down a truth that's unavailable, and it can redirect my efforts towards places where I can actually get a lot of value today. So that's an argument for the effectiveness of this question on the smaller scale, interpersonal level. Now, when we move to just the individual level, the example that I like the most in my life is just, who left the fridge open? All right, so I walk into the kitchen, fridge is open. Fridge should not be open. Definitely shouldn't be open. So who left the fridge open? Does the truth of that matter? No. But the narrative that I construct in that moment does matter, because if I make the assumption, well-founded though it may be, that one of my housemates left the fridge open, right, then that creates an opening for all sorts of narratives about dissatisfaction, upset, anger, frustration, etc., all kinds of unpleasantness to sort of get its hooks into me, really get going. But if I just in that moment go, yeah, I left the fridge open. Yeah, that was me. That seems like something I would do. Sure, yeah, that was probably me. And I just close the fridge. Cool. It's over. It's done. It's in the past. I created a problem. I resolved the problem. Right? I'll be more attentive in the future about making sure that the fridge gets closed. But hey, you know what? At the end of the day, the fridge is closed. Problem solved. And if I just construct a narrative that doesn't involve any sort of interpersonal turmoil, then I can just walk away from that and get on with the rest of my life. And again, the capital T truth of that matter is probably inaccessible, right? Because whoever left everybody knows that you're not supposed to leave the fridge open, so whoever left the fridge open didn't do it knowingly. I could ask everybody in the house, did you leave the fridge open? And they would all go, I don't think so. And then that's a weird conversation to have had, like this confrontational thing, and it's provided zero value. So, oh yeah, somebody left the knife on the counter. Yeah, that was probably me. Let me just wash it and put it away. Life is easy. If I really get hung up, though, on finding out exactly who left the knife on the counter, then life is not so easy, right? And very often in life, if we have internalized this sort of notion that the truth is all important, that the capital T truth is to be the ideal to which we should aspire at all times and all places, we miss a lot of opportunities to save ourselves a lot of cognitive effort and interpersonal strife by just constructing a narrative that places the responsibility sort of solely with us so that we can get on with life. When I was at the monastery, the sort of very compact formulation of that was just, I'm a somebody. So anytime you're in a situation where the thought arises, somebody really should do something about X. Well, I'm a somebody. Let me just do it. We now have a lot more explanatory framework, and we have this nice question to ask to get us to that position. But that's really the gist of it on the individual level, is if we're attentive to the narratives that we're constructing as we go about our life on a day-to-day basis, what we realize is that the actual truth of many, many of the situations that vex us simply don't matter and really aren't available. So let it go, construct a narrative that makes it easy to get on with your life with a minimum of sort of opportunities for negative emotional experiences. It's a big improvement. So we can see, sort of on a big picture level, engaging as a citizen, on a smaller level, engaging with one's social network, and on the individual level, asking the question, does the truth matter? You can really derive a lot of value